Hi, this is the Aviar Home. Welcome to our little fireside chat.
Hi, it's Joe Bear here at home with my wife Angie.
Hi.
And we're going to be discussing an article on education that is part of this project that we're doing for St. Francis de Sales. My wife Angie is studying to be a teacher, taking classes over at Lone Star right now, and she's had some substitute experience, and so I thought she'd enjoy talking about this article with me. The name of the article is Classical Schools Put Plato Over iPad. It can be found on www.schoolsofthought.blogs.cnn.com. It's by Julia Duane, again at CNN, and it was written on June 21st, 2013. It deals with the subject of classical Catholic education as one possible answer to the question of reform and change in American schools.
And one of the things we discuss a lot is the use of technology in the classroom, using smart boards and laptops and iPads and stuff like that. What do you feel about using technology in the classroom?
Well, there's no doubt that technology is a good thing, especially with this present generation of students, because they're very high-tech in their own personal and private lives. And the use of technology really reaches out to them and grabs their attention. The problem is that very often we're using it in a way that's, I hate to say superficial, but it doesn't necessarily enhance the learning experience. Very often we're incorporating technology in a way that's more about just saying that we did it. You know, just in order to have it looking good on the lesson plan, in order to say, hey boss, or hey superintendent, we're using those iPads that you paid for. But it's not necessarily enhancing the learning process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so basically, there's no difference in using an old-fashioned chalkboard with chalk dust and erasers and everything versus a smart board.
Well, a smart board might be to your advantage if it's going to allow you to bring in material right there on the spot that's particularly relevant to the lesson. But just to do it so that you can say that you're doing it, it's almost like we're entering into a technological arms race against the public schools. And yet, when we look across the street at the public schools, we see that they're spending more money than us, their classrooms have more technology than us. Some of these public school classrooms look like the set of Star Trek, but their standardized test scores aren't as good as ours. Their college entry rates aren't as good as ours. I mean, if we think about it, the best teachers in human history, from Confucius to Socrates to Jesus Christ, they were fairly low-tech in their approach, but what they had was a content worth passing on.
Right. Good. And there's also these theories, many theorists out there that discuss childhood development, such as Piaget and Erikson. And how do you feel they have contributed to the field of education?
Well, when you say those names, it takes me back to the college education classes where they're training you to be a teacher, and you know, those names are Piaget, Erikson, Maslow, and his hierarchy of needs. They're talked about in the halls of university education programs, the same way you'll hear Catholic priests talking about St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, these great doctors of the church, with such reverence and enthusiasm, as if their names are hallowed. But very often their ideas don't translate into results in the classroom, because very often, you know, they based their theories on their own memories of their own childhood, or as with Piaget, it's well known that the only children with whom he worked were his own, who were children of a privileged background and very privileged upbringing. And in some cases, these psychologists, their best work is being done with lab rats and monkeys in cages, which is very different than the actual facts in the classroom on the ground. But another point about that is, and psychology can be very useful for the subject of how we learn, but it still disconnects from the subject of what we learn. We don't want there to be a disconnect between how we learn versus what we learn.
I see. And multiple intelligence as well. We discuss different types of intelligence, such as linguistic intelligence or naturalistic intelligence, musical intelligence. And how do you integrate all these different intelligences into lesson plans in the classroom?
The reality is that you don't. And that's not something you want to tell one of your college professors in the education course. But the fact is, if you have a room with 20 students in that room, yes, some of them are visual learners. They're going to learn better by painting and drawing and coloring. There are others that are auditory learners who are going to learn better from a question and answer session or listening to something. There are students that are bodily kinesthetic learners who moving around and being physically engaged is important. Others are tactile learners who learn through manipulatives. But again, in a classroom of 20 kids in 45 minutes, there's no way that you're going to do the basic work of a classroom teacher, taking roll, picking up homework, checking, assessing, getting the kids packed up and ready to move to the next class, and run 5 different lesson plans, breaking students up into little miniature groups. And it sounds great in theory, and that is the case with many of the things that are presented to teachers on the subject of how students learn, whether it's brain-based learning or the idea of multiple intelligences or whatever it may be, incorporating technology. When we're in services and workshops, when we're in seminars, the people who are getting paid to talk about these things, they're knowledgeable and it sounds great, but the reality in the classroom is usually something different. It's kind of like in the military, where you have generals in a boardroom and their strategies may sound brilliant, but the troops in the trenches would strongly disagree.
I see. And so how do you define classical Catholic education?
Well, if you think about it, if you went to a Catholic school, or even if you didn't, if you were educated before, let's say, the 1970s, you probably have some idea of what classical Catholic education is. It's really the opposite of what we've talked about so far. What we've talked about so far is this tendency to try to fix the education system by moving through a series of fads, a series of the latest and greatest fashion in education, like trends. And when you think about trends, when you think about fads and fashions, we look back at them and we laugh at them, we mock them. You look back at your old high school yearbook pictures and you see yourself in the bell-bottoms with the big wide lapel, or in the 80s you see yourself with the leg warmers and the poodle hair. And it's funny. Well, 20, 30 years from now, educators are going to look back at the things that the trends, the fads that were going through the education industry, and they're going to laugh at it. Catholic classical education, the idea is really the opposite. Just like if I wanted to take a picture that I'm not going to laugh at in 30 years, wear a nice navy blue suit with a white button-down collared shirt, maybe a nice tie that matches, black leather shoes, well polished, basic traditional men's haircut. And looking back at that picture, you might not be able to even date it because it has a timeless look. It's the same
like
idea.
a little black dress lady.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that is it's yesterday, it's today, it's tomorrow, it's forever.
Where can I find a curriculum
On Catholic
Catholic
classical education. Something of a tongue twister there. Well, first off, if you think about it, you have a pretty good idea of what the curriculum is just by the name. When we talk about classical, we're talking about the classics that have been the basics of Western civilization, cross-content areas. We're talking about things like ancient Greek and Roman mythology and literature. We're talking about classical music. We're talking about Gregorian chant. We're looking at a wide array of the classics, the basics. Very often our students in art classes, and they may be gifted artistically, and they may be getting good instruction in terms of technique. But you know, a lot of students, if you ask them to tell you about Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael, or Donatello, they think you're talking about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They don't know about the great Renaissance artists like Botticelli and so forth, Caravaggio. The same thing with music. You may have students that are musically talented and they're receiving really good instruction in that field, but they don't know the difference between a concerto and a sonata and a symphony. They're not familiar with Beethoven and Mozart. But as far as a formal curriculum, since you asked, the article itself the article itself highlights a school in Maryland, a school called St. Jerome's Catholic School, St. Jerome Parish and Academy, and they are in Hyattville, Maryland, and their website is stjeromeschool.htm. And if you go to their web page, one of the documents that they have, the educational plan for St. Jerome Classical School. And it lays out a detailed curriculum in every instructional area: art, music, science, math, geography, language. A strong focus on getting back to educating children in the basics of Greek and Latin, teaching them about the ancient civilizations that led to our present Western civilization. A lot about as Christians, a lot about our Jewish theological and religious heritage, cultural heritage, the cultural and linguistic heritage that comes to us from the Greeks and Romans, deep study of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period, and basically all the things that have led to the development of Christian culture. Again, the name of that school that the article eventually leads to is St. Jerome Classical School, or St. Jerome Academy. Again, they have their own website there. And on the website is a link to curriculum and also a discussion on implementation. Again, the article itself is Classical Schools Put Plato Over iPad. You can find that at www.schoolsofthought.blogs.cnn.com. It's from June 21st, 2013. The article is by Julia Duin, that's D-U-I-N. And it's really an article that I think is intended more to provoke questions than to answer them. An article that's intended to open up a dialogue, not just about how we teach, but what we teach. An article that's not just about methodology, but about the quality of the curriculum itself.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Get some more coffee.
Okay.